Welcome to the Shortway Show on a very special time. Yes, it is usually 7 p.m. I know, but today it is 3 p.m. Eastern 3 p.m. on the East Coast. And I have a very special guest. I have a guest who's going to talk to you about urban stuff. And we don't usually talk urban stuff that much, but we are. And a different way of dealing with it via, believe it or not, the private market, not big government. I know you just fell out of your chair, but it's true. We're going to discuss that today. And because he is traveling across the global south, he is actually in Africa as we speak. So I had to change the time. That's why I did it. But I'm telling you, it's going to be worth it. We're going to be talking to he is an urban activist and a journalist, the man himself from Cape Town, Scott Beyer. How are you, sir?
Hi, Larry. I'm good.
Awesome. And if you want to follow Scott, you can. Please head over to his website, marketurbanismreport.com. Or you can follow him on Twitter at Market Urbanist. Either one of those will work. So, Scott, I got to get right into it here, right? Everyone thinking about urban or city is always thinking, look, big government is the reason we even have cities, and they're the savior, and they're the reason, and they've always got to save us. You don't believe that at all. How do we get around that thought process of people even imagining that big government isn't going to help us or save us?
Well, I think it begins with like anyone who thinks that cities exist because of government, that unto itself, that would be the first thing to correct about somebody's thinking. Because historically, cities, I mean, if you look at cities as kind of like the great NYU planning professor, Alain Berthaud, called them labor markets. He thinks cities are labor markets. And that's all. Okay. That's really all they've ever been. I mean, even if you go back to like the BC era, the raison d'etre of cities was that they had certain natural resource or proximity related advantages that caused people to gravitate them, and then they built their lives and did their jobs and did their work. And the city kind of sprouted around that. And
well, I even stay here in New York, right? I mean, I look at New York City, and you're from New York City, right? Originally, right?
I'm from Virginia. I was living in New York for a while.
Living in New York. Okay, yeah, I know you spent time in New York City. So in New York City, where I'm actually born here and live here still now. I mean, the reason why New York City is awesome is not because, for the individual person, is not because it's a port city. There's lots of port cities. The reason why it's so awesome is all the talent that comes here. Your exact point. The talent flocks here. So people want the talent. They want the people who have the degrees, or the people who have the knowledge, or the people with the work. I mean, that was one of the biggest reasons to come to New York. It was the opportunity. And then the culture grew from that. And if you wanted to be cultural, you had to come here. And then finance grew here. And if you wanted finance, that's here. And I see what you're saying. It's very obvious here to me in New York City.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, a certain type of person thinks that New York City exists and is cool because of all the things that the government does, like the subway and the roads and all that. But that isn't really what built New York City. It's like
but everything the government does here actually sucks. It's the private sector does. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, like it was effectively private activity and private migration into the area that caused New York City to grow. I mean, all the way from the Indians to the Dutch to kind of becoming the Ellis Island of America and the place where all the immigrants went. It's because people wanted to go there because there were jobs and there were natural resources that they could benefit from. A lot of the government programs came after, and as you pointed out, quite a lot of them are subpar. I mean, that's kind of the other angle of the answer, is just that even a lot of what we think of as the common infrastructure that's built in cities, that used to be a private sector thing. In many cases, and I would argue that the gradual transfer of it into the government, into a socialized system, has made that infrastructure worse.
Yeah, most people don't know that the subway system in New York City used to be privatized. They don't realize that. They think it's always been the New York City MTA, but that's not true. But you bring up some very important points with your urbanism concepts and ideas and things that I think most people don't think about, which is your housing affects so much, right? Where you live really affects so much of your life, which I rarely hear people. Most people talking about housing or where they live or neighborhood, they talk about culture only, right? Culture, or they talk about, my father was here, my mother was here, that type of thing. But you talk about the idea of it affects your schooling, it affects your work-life balance, it affects all types of your mental health. It affects so much. And this is a part that people don't talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it affects how close you are to your job. I mean, let's just start with that. Like, ideally, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, people, if you ask most people, they would probably want like a 10 to 15 minute commute.
Sure.
After all, when they measure the average commutes of CEOs, it's often very short. So the CEO that decides where the headquarters, oftentimes, of their company is located is going to be very close to their home. That speaks to a market preference for those who have that option of living close to their work. But most people don't get that luxury because the housing cannot be built close to the jobs.
Why is Warren Buffett's headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska? And why is Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas? It's not like those are the hubs that they all wanted to run to. It's what they knew. You're totally right. I mean, and these are some of the richest people in our entire nation.
Yeah. Yeah, and their headquarters are often close to where they live too. I mean, I think Warren Buffett has like a 5-minute commute or something like that.
There we go. Yes, absolutely. But let me then move to something else that's happening here, and we have to worry about this, particularly for cities. And I see it here in New York again, the biggest city in America, right? The biggest one, which is the decline, if not even destruction, of office space. I mean, it's really affecting how people think, where they live, and the commute now is, I click on my computer and get online for some people, right? I mean, that becomes the commute. Am I wrong here?
No, and that's a lot of people are blaming the COVID situation for that, but it was actually happening quite some time before that. And you can even look at newspaper articles back in the 80s talking about how there was eventually going to be remote work. So I think that's a trend that has long been going on. It's long been reflected in an increasingly rising vacancy rate within office buildings. And so the interesting thing about it is like vacancy, when you look at vacancy rates across real estate genres, it's very high in office. It's often very high in retail. It's very low in housing because we have a housing shortage. So that would be one of the things where, from a planning perspective, they might think to put two and two together and say, well, a lot of this, maybe we should rezone these areas, or just not zone them, period, and allow a proper conversion. Because after all, cities change, consumer preferences change, and so the regulatory code would need to reflect that.
Well, so what you're saying though is very, and this, I'm preaching to the choir here. Maybe I'm talking more for the audience than for you, but what you're saying is very radical. You're basically saying that the planning doesn't work, right? You're almost talking about I think the phrase you've used is unplanning, right? Like just let's stop zoning everything and let's let some people do work. And I think probably one of the most famous stories, and I'm not sure if it's true, but I think it's actually true. I know the story I heard as a consultant years ago was that there was a group of people who built a building on a campus, a college campus, and then did not put in a sidewalk, no sidewalks. And they just waited until the people started walking, and wherever they then saw the trails that people had done, they then put it in the sidewalk after the people had made trails, right? That's where sidewalks should go, right? Where they're walking, we made a sidewalk. Now, I don't know if that's actually a true story, but I've heard that often. And I feel that's kind of what you're saying. Am I reading you right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the essential critiques of market urbanism is that cities are these organisms that have millions of people living in them, and no two people are exactly alike and have exactly the same preferences. So when you think about a place that has it's almost like cells. I mean, if you have millions of these different people walking around in the city and they all have different preferences, you're going to have a great deal of diversity of just taste and consumer choice and mobility
It's the best
patterns
part of
and
the city.
jobs.
That diversity is why we do it, right? That's the point.
Yeah, the economic diversity of cities. And so I think the central critique of market urbanism, among others, is just that a planning bureaucracy which might compile 20 or 30 people in the department who all have their own kind of like insular culture and normative bias that doesn't reflect the whole city. They're not going to be able to plan the city and plan the complex dynamics of a 3 million person city, say. And so you're going to get all of these you're going to get all of these planning failures, such as putting sidewalks where people don't actually want to walk, and so on and so forth.
Right. No, I think we see it everywhere, but isn't there now a fear, right, that if we do that, that the evil capitalist will just knock down the poor person's, building and put up a stadium, right? I mean, isn't that the image that some people have? Here comes the rich guy, he's going to come in and, oh, this is the orphanage. And he's going to, crush the orphanage with the kids in it, right? And then he's going to build up a stadium for rich people to go to. I mean, that's the image of it. But I don't feel like any of that's real. I feel like that's TV, or is that a real fear?
Well, it could be. I mean, if you're talking about, like, say, Manhattan, where you've got some of the highest land values in the country, or frankly, the world. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna. I wouldn't say it's necessarily going to be stadiums all the time, but it's going to be an optimized use of land. It's going to be people. In other words, like a single family home is not going to exist in Manhattan. I think if you allow the market to work, people will build towers, but that's okay.
Got it.
Like, it's easy to
that's
frame
that
good
for us. That's better for the planet. That's better for us. That's actually better, isn't it?
Yes. It is. I mean, and you can frame it as like the rich developer building it, and yes, I would agree. Like, you have to be very well capitalized to build a skyscraper. But I mean, look at what the skyscraper is accomplishing. Like, it's providing lots of housing for people. It's good for the planet. It's feeding into the transit system, which is at this point like kind of on the verge of bankruptcy. So we need more transit riders. Yes, overall, it's a good social model.
Well, this is what you talk about. You talk about the idea of, and this is, again, shocking for so many people to even hear, and that is the idea that capitalist outcomes are actually good. And you say this because you bring up things like, I'm going to bring up a couple ideas that you brought up in the past, which is like green hubs, right? That greenery and parks and trees and things like that are good for urban people, good for people in general, right? Good for us. That these are actually where you have, and tell me if I got the phrase right, maximum land value, right? Which is what the capitalist wants, right? Doesn't the capitalist want maximum land value? And you're saying that all the good things actually is what people want, and this is going to provide maximum land value. So the capitalist is actually incentivized to do better than the government employee. Did I say that correctly or no?
Yeah, and so that theme is very much sticking out as I travel. So I don't know if you know this or if the audience knows this, but I'm currently on a little bit of a cross global excursion. And I just got done with
a year and a half all over the like the global South, right?
Yes, I'm doing a year and a half tour of the global South that's going to involve, or already has involved, 6 months in Latin America. It's going to be 6 months in Africa, which I'm just starting, and 6 months in Asia. And so, 40 big cities and just about that many countries. And one of the themes that really stuck out as I was like just looking at different real estate concepts through Latin America is how much really it's more of a cultural thing there than it is in the US even. This idea that if you're trying to cater to the wealthy, you make things really nice, or even to the middle class. Like, the nicer you make something in respect of land use and architectural design, the more ROI it gets, like the more people who want to gravitate there. So I'll give you an example. Like, people say buildings in the US are ugly, but a lot of the upscale buildings in Latin America are quite nice. Like, they have this culture of, for example, if you build a mid-rise condo, you have a bunch of hanging gardens coming down from the balcony. And
Ooh,
it's
nice.
it's a beautiful, yeah, it's a beautiful aesthetic. And it's the type of thing where whoever's managing that building probably did the internal calculation of saying, managing these plants is going to cost me X amount, but it's going to attract X amount more in rents. And so the trade-off is worth it. And then I'm even seeing this concept on steroids when I go to these different, like, there's these different private planned communities that are getting built in Latin America. I call them startup cities.
But hold on
where,
1 second. I want to touch this piece. 1 second, if I could. I want to push a little bit here. When I think of the global South, I think in general, most of the population is going to be poorer than most of the developed world. Where you're going, is that true? Or are you only going to wealthy areas? Or are you going to areas where there are people who are much poorer than most Western countries?
Oh, it's very true. It is every country that I'm going to is dramatically poorer than the United States, with a couple exceptions. Like Singapore and Hong Kong are wealthier than the United States, but for example, in Latin America, every country. I mean, I don't think there's a Latin American country that has even half the per capita GDP that the U.S. has, and many of them have like 1/5 or 1/10. So yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the audience heard that this isn't just you go into the ritziest neighborhoods of the area. You're not doing that. This is regular people in regular cities.
Oh, I go to all kinds of areas. I mean, we can we can talk about some of the like hardcore third world style favelas, but I'm just using, because you asked what was
I didn't want to put you in a bad light. That's why I want to make sure we were clear on that, because I know I was asking about the big stuff from Manhattan because I'm the New York City guy, so that's why I asked. But yes.
Yeah, but I think the overall point was just that I was finding, when I went to the wealthy areas in Latin America, what I was finding is that there was this very specific calculation that the builders seem to be making of, let's make our building as nice as possible, because that's what's going to attract the most money and attract like the best clientele, and it's a good business decision. So I think, to your point, like, yeah, capitalism, because it's based on a profit motive, it very often produces nice things.
I like that. You're talking about making a city attractive, right? So that people want to come to it, so that people want to service it, that kind of thing. I get it. Let me talk to my audience for a second. Guys, if you like what you're hearing, then support the show by clicking that like button right now. If you like it, click that like button. It does matter tremendously. And if you happen to be watching this on Twitter, then do me a favor, retweet this now, right? If you're watching on Twitter, just retweet it right now so that people can see this. And if you are on Twitter, guess what? You can support Scott. You can follow him on Twitter at Market Urbanist. Or if you want to see what he's doing, you like what he's hearing, you want to see some of his stuff he's doing, head over to his website, Market Urbanism Report.com. So, Scott, I want to go to a part which, again, affects me. I'm being a little bit selfish in this, right? But most of my audience, not most, at least 40% is probably based somehow in New York State. So I want to look at New York. New York has a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, you know it. You've been here before. So much bureaucracy. And New York City, more than the rest of the state, so much bureaucracy. Can any of your ideas or concepts, can they work in a system that is this bureaucratic? Or do we have to change the system first before we can deal with some of these ideas?
Well, that's one of the things I was going to be talking about, kind of getting beyond the specific projects in Latin America, is something that really has come to interest me, and it's more common in the developing world, which is one of the reasons that I'm traveling through it, is this idea of starting new cities. It's kind of this motif that says the existing structures are so fundamentally backwards and so fundamentally
Yes.
unable to be reformed that we need to build new cities and new societies. So there's a lot of people kind of running with this mantle. You've got the Charter Cities Institute, and you've got Free Private Cities and Free Cities Foundation, and things like that. But the basic argument is people who love freedom need to start building networks online, and eventually they need to translate that into making actual land purchases where they can convince a surrounding government to give them like special economic zone status or something of that nature, like
Oh,
charter city status, and basically like create new governance or new charters that say we have the foundational principles of freedom in this community, and when you move there, that's what you're agreeing to. You're not agreeing to statism, you're not agreeing to high taxes, you're agreeing to limited government. And so to me, it's a really interesting concept because it's basically saying like, no, new places like New York City are are irredeemable.
you're a lost cause, run away, right? Yes.
Yeah,
But
and
it's funny that you say that though, right? Because there's several things that makes me worry about this. And to be forward, Scott, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I'm worried. And I'm worried because I see it in New York City already. New York State as a whole, everyone's bailing it out of New York State like there's no tomorrow, but they're also leaving New York City. So people are leaving. They're just packing up. They're voting with their feet. They're leaving. And so if I'm New York, if I'm Kathy Hochul, who's the New York State governor, by default, I'm a tyrant because that's how it works. So I'm not going to say, hey, Scott, here's some nice, cool, urban area that you can show everybody how bad I am. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say no, right? I'm not going to let you show everybody how terrible I am because your city is going to work way better than my garbage cities. So there's no way I'm going to let you do this. How do you, are we all moving to Wyoming? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, a couple things. So I agree with you. I mean, in that, frankly, like there's been a movement of people who've wanted to create like special economic zones in the U.S. And basically, like the intel they tell me is the bureaucracy in the U.S. doesn't want this because of exactly what you're talking about. You're going to make them look bad, and it's going to be like tax flights in the same way that Florida makes New York look bad. Like people leave New York and they go to Florida, and so it's kind of what you're talking about. But the one rebuttal that you could provide to that is that I think the contract that a lot of these private city people are like the suggestion they're making is go to a host government that maybe doesn't have a lot of money and it's kind of it has a bad reputation per se, and just say, look, you're a broke, failed state, and if you let us create this autonomous zone within your state, we will pay you a fee every year, a set fee, and for basically the privilege of being able to operate autonomously within your region. And by the way, you also get a lot of spillover economic activity, and that should be a good enough trade-off for you that you allow us to build these zones.
So we bribe them up front, and then we let them give everybody speeding tickets as everybody races through their territory to get to us. It's basically how we do it, right? So they get to give people speeding tickets as everyone's driving quickly into our little towns. Okay, I guess I get that, but isn't that by default going to raise taxes?
I'm not sure I'd call it a bribe, because
I'm teasing you, Scott. You know I'm teasing you. Yes.
Well, I think that so if you pay them a set fee and then like maybe they provide military services or something like that, like it's not necessarily just giving them money, but yeah, I mean you could see how like somebody as greedy as the New York politicians, if you framed it to them that way, of like, you're the state government is going to get a huge sum every year, or we could go to Massachusetts, or we could go to Wyoming. So it's your choice.
Right.
If you frame it to them that way, who knows?
Yeah, I'm with you. But my other worry though is, the current, and this goes back to the broken system, right? Right now, particularly in cities like New York or big cities like this, a lot of the actually urbanists here are lonely and disconnected and isolated. So I don't know if many of them could even imagine a better urban life. That makes any sense. I feel like we have to show them that there can be a better urban life, because so many people believe that urbanism is by default lonely. Is this not true?
Well, it does seem to me that a certain personality type is it gravitates to New York. It's very different than where I'm from. You know, like I'm from Virginia. I grew up in a city, Charlottesville, that's routinely like voted one of the friendliest, happiest places.
Right.
So it was kind of a culture shock to me when I moved to New York and just saw like the I'm not going to pronounce this right, but the anonymity of the city, of just being like this atom in the city that that nobody notices when you walk down the street, and nobody knows. And so it might be that certain types of people who are kind of like, they actually like that. They like the privacy of that. And I don't know.
People think they do, but then they show up and they wind up being lonely. I think a lot of people think that if they're from like Charlottesville, they think they're going to go to New York City and have a bigger Charlottesville, like more friendly people and more. I think most people believe that. And then they come in and realize, wow, people want me to go in my apartment and shut up. Like that's what people want. Right. So I think it is a challenge. And I think your ideas, which is why I love your ideas of, I don't know how to say, but you talk about the ideas of like creating more community, right? Having people more involved. I love the idea. I always thought that's what urbanism was about, which is why I don't live in Manhattan. I live in the boroughs. And I think in the boroughs, you have a bit more of that, right? Like where I live in Queens, I know who my neighbors are, right? I know who the guy across who owns the deli. Like I know who he is. I know the guy who fixes my computer. I know who he is, right? Like I know the people around me in my area. So I'm much more part of my community, if that makes any sense. But I think living in places like big cities, I think a lot of people don't. I think I'm the oddball sometimes.
Yeah, well, I personally I like city living. And I guess, yeah, it's just different because the alternative is when you live in a small town, you have a lot of unwanted run-ins as well. So it's kind of the opposite problem. I think it just depends on, I'm not going to make some broad sweeping generalization about what everybody wants, because I think everybody wants things different.
Yes.
It is kind of funny though, like you're reminding me of just back when I moved to New York, and I was in my late teens, and I was kind of like a friendly guy from Virginia, and I remember like being like a little too naive about people coming up to me on the street wanting to talk. Like those are crazy people. Those are in New York. That's crazy people doing that.
Yes.
But in Virginia, it's just kind of like what people do. So
absolutely,
I remember like kind of getting in some precarious situations where I was a little too trusty. But luckily, nothing super bad happened because I'm still here. So
absolutely. Let me grab a couple comments if I could. Phil says, what are the best places to set up these new experimental cities? Do you know, I know you're not finished with your tour now, but do you have any idea, pre-completion of your tour on where might be a better place or a good place to set up some of these cities? Or in theory, are there any places in America that you think might be ripe for this? I mean, I made up Wyoming, but maybe Wyoming is a good idea.
Well, to me, the best place in the U.S. to do it would be Texas. Just because you've got a lot of, there's a lot of factors there. I mean, but I think the main one just being that they are politically friendly to this concept. And in fact, they even have their own like special policy where you can form like a specific kind of municipal jurisdiction that is amenable to being governed the way you want it to. The problem with the U.S. again, though, is
hold on. All right, Phil, we're moving to Texas. Phil, me and you moving to Texas. Get the van. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. Well,
Scott.
I mean, there's part of me that thinks like if I ever want to try to pursue a market urbanism style community in the U.S., Texas strikes me as the best place to do it. But the problem is that kind of, again, we don't have that special economic zone policy.
Right.
So if you're a libertarian in the U.S., even if you're living in this market urbanist community, you're still dealing with the 37% top income tax rate. You're still dealing with the FBI and the CIA and all these like kind of horrible bureaucracies, all the
Absolutely.
moral hazards of the federal government. You're still dealing with it.
Absolutely. Rebecca says the Libertarian Party's Frontier Project. If the Libertarian Party's Frontier Project was still active, I would consider moving to Wyoming. Unfortunately, it's now dead. Well, maybe we got to reboot it, Rebecca. Maybe we do, and maybe we gotta get Scott to help us out with that. Maybe we'll do that. I don't know. It sounds good.
I don't even know about that. I know about the New Hampshire one.
That one too. There was a Wyoming and New Hampshire one. So I brought up Wyoming because I remember Wyoming. But yes, there were two of them. Yes, we've been trying here, Scott. We hear you. We've been trying. That's all. We have been trying. But maybe you're gonna take us off to, I don't know, South Africa or something. Whatever. I don't know. Maybe you're gonna make us go there. We'll figure it out.
Well,
So
yeah. I mean, part of the
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go. Well, I was just going to say part of the purpose of my project is to have a better answer for that. Like, which jurisdictions around the world are most friendly to this idea?
Absolutely. Sam says Rochester and Buffalo have lots of friendly people, and they're big enough where you won't know anyone. I agree, right? I happen to like both of those cities. I've been there many times. I agree. I think he's right. Too bad they had the same government overreach problems that are common in New York State. Also true. Sam is correct in both of those. He's absolutely true. But let me go to the next piece that you brought up. This idea of, if we start this, you have this concept of the network state. Mm-hmm. This idea to me is both wonderful and scary. It is both. Like, I think it's a great idea and I'm scared of it. Both of those are true. Can you please tell the audience about what the network state is, the concept?
Well, yeah, it's a book that I just read that is also very common in the private city movement. Written by Balaji Sarana something. I don't know his last name, but yeah, he's a big crypto guy. He's kind of like a techno libertarian based in Silicon Valley, and the idea of the network state is kind of like what Facebook is, but it would be something more specific, where you build a network of people who all believe the same thing, all who share the same values. So imagine if you had a global platform of 3 million libertarians that were on some sort of shared platform together discussing ideas. Right. That to me would be the foundation for potentially starting a country then, because if they can pool together money and purchase land somewhere, then and convince a government to like give them autonomy, then boom, you've got a new country. That's basically like founded on the principles that the U.S. was originally supposed to be founded on, but never really got around to it. And so, yeah, I mean, but the network state is the internet version of this. It's developing this community online. And so to me, I don't know that it's really that scary. It's kind of just like,
well, it scares me because now I'm putting all my libertarians in one area so the FBI can come arrest us all in one fatal swoop. That's why it's scary for me. Okay. Right.
But.
Right. They can get us all at one time. That's it.
Okay. Well, what Balaji would say to that is that his network state could be encrypted in a way that, like all the communication runs on the blockchain, so nobody, like, it's anonymous and it's censorship free, and nobody like the FBI can even come and find it, whether or not you believe that or not.
Yeah, the Alaskan Giraffe is already thinking the same way. He says, and convince the government to give them autonomy. Ha ha ha! Yes, that's my disdain for government is so high. I'm with the giraffe. I'm not sure we can make this happen, but I do love the idea. Your whole concept is, which I like so much, is the idea of a city being thought of and marketed as almost like a product or a service, or maybe a both, right? Because you're getting both. You're getting a product and you're getting services, right? So you're marketing it as that, trying to get the best people to want to come in. And in theory, I know what many people who are anti-capitalist to this idea would say, we can't do this, Scott, because that means only the rich people go there. And I get that fear, but what I see is in every successful company, every successful product has different product levels of different people. right? So like everyone uses Walmart, right? Everyone, and they're super wealthy, right? Everyone uses, McDonald's, and they're super wealthy, right? You can go to the $1 meal, or you can go there and buy whatever you want to buy, right? You can do all types of stuff. My assumption is, if we treated cities this way, there would be products that would be for all levels of income. I mean, that's my assumption. Am I off here, Scott?
So what I'm finding when I interviewed these different startup cities, like some of the managers and people who founded them, is they see a financial benefit in putting as many people in the city as possible and appealing to as many people as possible. So one interesting thing is, like, they're very, very dense from a standpoint of population density. Like, a lot of these cities that I'm interviewing, they'll be less than a square mile, but they'll have like 15,000 people that are being planned to live there. So that's actually more dense than Manhattan, what I just described. And so, and yeah, like you say, they have different housing formats, from studio apartments to all the way to single family mansions that are designed to appeal to different income groups. So I think it's a little bit. Now, to be sure, like a lot of HOA style planned communities are just gated communities for the rich, but that's not really like the stuff I'm interested in. Like the startup cities that I'm going to see aren't geared to be that way. Like, they actually are making the philosophical point of, the more people you appeal to, the more money you'll make.
So let me ask a question. In that style of, I guess, mega HOA or whatever you would call it, does the person who lives in a studio have the same, I guess, voting rights, or whatever would be the way that you would manage the community or vote on things, as the guy or gal who lives in the one family mansion? Or do you vote with your dollars instead?
Well, the cities that I've been studying actually don't have a voting process. Like, they're not municipalities. So
they're not.
the
Okay.
people, yeah. Which actually appeals to me. Like, I like the idea of the people who are making the decisions are the management board, like the board of investors. But they have to make decisions in such a way that they appeal to people, and people want to live in the community. So that might seem anti-democratic. I'm sure that's going to seem anti-democratic to a lot of people, but I actually view that as something that makes the community less acrimonious and more efficient, and actually like better at providing services.
I worry about that one for a couple reasons. One, because I think if you're wealthier and you don't like the community, you just move. Makes sense. I get that completely, right? If I have enough money to move in and out, I agree with you, right? I don't like the management, I'm going to pack up and leave. I got it. But if I'm not wealthy, it's expensive to move. It's hard to move. I may find myself trapped with a management that I disagree with, and have no real reason to, no real way to either move or to affect change in my community. That would worry me. I would like to have some way of people who are unable to move, or maybe I'm just physically old and I can't move, or I'm disabled, or insert reason here, and I move to this community and I love it, and now all of a sudden it's not Jane who's in charge, now it's Jim who's in charge, and I don't like Jim. We don't get along. He wants to do stuff I don't want to do anymore, and I have no recourse. Do you see my worry?
Yeah, I do. But again, we're talking about small proprietary communities that in most cases are under 1 square mile. So it's like, you either decide to live there or you don't. I mean, I think if you choose to live there, you know the contract of the community and the basic layout, and you're accepting that up front, and going to live there, kind of in the same way. I mean, it's the same deal with a condo. I think in most cases it's now there's like condo boards that I guess have presidents and are elected to some degree. So that might be small time democracy.
Though, even though people hate condos, I do have the opportunity to run for the board and to be on the board and make change, even though I may lose because maybe I'm a jerk and no one likes me. But I do have the opportunity that I could, if I wanted to try to get on that board and try to make changes in my condo. And I feel like my worry would be if we had that kind of thing, the support and service staff would not live in the community, because you would need service staff and support staff for any community, right? You need people who can deliver food, people who are going to do the work that needs to be done in the physical community. If you have a city that isn't receptive to them, then all of the people who service that community will live outside the city. Similar in a way that many people who work in Manhattan don't live in Manhattan, but they've all got to come into the city. So the city might be beautiful, but then do the people who work the city, are they able to also enjoy the beautiful areas, which I think are amazing? I love the idea, and I love what you've talked about, the idea of it being dense, and it's dense because it's focused on transit systems. It's focused on transportation and schooling and such. And I feel like people would want to go there. That my only worry, I guess, is being trapped, I guess, is my concern. That's my worry.
Well, at least two of the cities that I visited, one of them was in Honduras and the other was in Guatemala, were specifically geared to the working class. Like the
so
CEO
good.
straight
Nice.
up said, this is what it's for. Like
Nice.
they were in no uncertain terms. So yeah, I mean, the socioeconomic dynamic of Latin America is very interesting. I mean, like in a lot of ways, the working class, as they're called, are like super duper poor. I mean, they're just living in shacks, like they're living in third world conditions. And so the promise of these startup cities is that they're giving them like a more standardized living standard, and kind of bringing them into the modern world, giving them internet and clean water and things like that. So yeah, it's just a mixed bag.
That's what I want to hear, right? That's what I want to. I love the idea of creating this, right? I love this idea of making a densely populated area that's based upon transit, so that people don't have to own cars, that they can get to work on their own, that they can travel around their area, they can go to the market when they go to the market, they can enjoy the fields, they can enjoy, the open fields, and they can enjoy the parks and all the things. I love this idea, and all I know for sure is our current system of cities is not working. So I am open. So, by the way, Scott, you have a fan. Phil says, Scott is one of the most interesting thinkers around. And unlike most intellectuals, puts in the work. Flirting with these ideas, Namibia is interesting in access to the ocean, and with Luke Skywalker-style moisture farms could overcome some of the traditional geographic challenges and open up new land for local African farmers. Guys paying it. Phil, you're doing your homework. Perhaps poor South African or Nigerians looking for opportunities, especially if there's a new port and maybe a railroad to the interior. Wow. I think Phil's paying attention, Scott.
Yeah, I'll be going to Nigeria. Namibia is not on the stop, but I'm looking forward to Lagos, Nigeria.
There we go. So I guess another piece that I wanted to bring up is you brought up lightly the idea of cryptocurrency and the blockchain. I feel like that almost has to be part of this in a way, right? Because if you're going to be doing this, you've got to create your own economy in a way. I mean, you kind of have to. You've kind of got to decouple from other things. Is the crypto community involved in this, or is this just you talking about it, or are they already involved?
It is. So there are different tokenization services that are trying to like get into some of these cities and connect with them. There was a city. So Prospera is one of these private cities that's in Honduras, and they are accepting Bitcoin as legal tender. So if you want to pay your like one of your fee bills in Bitcoin, you can do that. And it's just interesting because like even when I visited, I was like sitting in on a meeting where like a crypto entrepreneur was trying to like contract with the city, and the CEO actually had me sit in on that meeting, and so it was kind of, I felt like I was watching history in a way. But yeah, it's the short answer is yes. I think that it seems inevitable that the rise of really like two libertarian innovations simultaneously, that being decentralized currency, market-based currency, and private cities, it only just seems like a matter of time where they're going to coincide.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of currency, guys, if you want to support this show with currency, you can. You can do so by doing super chats on the Larry Sharpe YouTube page if you want to. That's one way if you want to support this show with currency. But you don't have to support the show with currency. Feel free to if you want to. You can also support by supporting my sponsor. My sponsors are the Advocates for self-government, right? Perfect timing to have a self-government guy on. If you want to go there, go to theadvocates.org. And please take one of their surveys. There's a human respect survey. There's a police survey. There's a national foreign policy survey, monetary policy survey. Take one of their single issue surveys. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. Go through it and then share the results. If you share the results online, I love it. They love it. Everybody's happy and it's free. I'm asking like 6 minutes of your time. I know it's a lot, but give it to me. You can. Do that if you can. Share the results. They will ask for your email address. If you like the Advocates for Self-Government and would like to get the email once a month from them, please put your email in. If you don't have to, not required. Either way, you can still share it. So please share it online. Let people see it. It's free. If you're like, Larry, I don't have 6 minutes. Okay, you got 2 minutes? Just take the world's smallest political quiz. That's 2 minutes. That's done. Take that, share that, same thing. Everybody's happy. Support my sponsors, guys. It does matter. But also, support Scott, who showed up today from Africa. He showed up today. So support him. Head over to his website, marketurbanismreport.com, or follow him on Twitter at Market Urbanist. I do want to cover one more thing if I could, Scott. And that's kind of the idea of private services, right? You bring this up, and I love it because it was kind of happening in New York City and it went away. The idea of almost like private transit or private buses or private all those types of things that we can't imagine in New York City or any city now really in America as being privatized. And I feel like in New York, and I remember this from years ago, so before the lockdowns came, there was a service in New York City. I forgot what it was called. It was called Via. And it was basically the bus routes, but it was people's cars. It was like Uber on the bus route. And you paid, I forgot what the fee was, whatever it was, $5, whatever it was. You got in the car and you sat in the car and the car would stop at the bus stops and you would get out as faster than the buses. And I thought to myself, at that time, the bus ticket, I think, was $2.25. So people were paying double to not be on a bus. And it didn't get rid of the buses. It just was another option, and it was successful. Of course, the city shut it down. But I feel like this could actually work. I don't know. Have you seen that where you are?
So this is, I can't overstate how ubiquitous this concept is around the world. We in the United States simply don't understand unless, because it's, so these are called jitney buses, just little mini buses that have oftentimes flexible routes, and they're just a single sole proprietor will own the bus and drive around. It's been,
I lived in the Philippines for a while, and the jitneys were everywhere. Yes. Well, they're everywhere all over the world. Like it's hard to overstate just how ubiquitous these are. They're all over Latin America. They're all over Africa. And even though I haven't been to Asia yet, I've heard they're all over Asia as well. Like this is a huge global industry. And the only reason they don't exist in the US is because they have been outlawed in most of these. And in Europe too, from what I understand, that Europe it's not as common in Europe either, because people in the West, like the Western world, view transportation as something that should be provided by the government. And they're very scared of the idea of having the private sector compete with the government. It's almost like everybody just has to take the government option, even though the government option oftentimes sucks. Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, here in South Africa, like there's these little vans that you can pay 75 cents and get all over the city. They're really cool.
Well, it's funny, when I was a kid, I grew up in the South Bronx. And when I was a kid, there was no Uber. It didn't happen, right? I grew up in the 70s, right? 60s and 70s in the South Bronx. There's no Uber, and cabs wouldn't come to my neighborhood. We had Gypsy Cabs, right? That's what we had. For those of you who know what Gypsy Cab is, it's a guy who decides, I'm going to use my car as a cab, and he paints one of his doors a different color. So it's a blue car with a red door. And you know, oh, okay, that's that, you know, it's Gypsy Cab, right? Because he's got a red door and his car's blue. So that's how you know. So you wave him down. And if you ever watch any of the old 1970s cop shows from New York City, like Starsky and Hutch or Kojak, or any of those old shows, whenever they go into the boroughs, they're on Gypsy Cabs because the cabs wouldn't go there. A bad neighborhood. I grew up in a bad neighborhood. So that's where they would go. And you know what? We trusted them because they were our neighbors. Like we knew the guy, like he lived in the apartment down the road, whatever. We knew the guy, lived in the apartment building next door to me, right? So we knew who the cab driver was. So we'd actually like knock on his door. Hey, you going someplace? I need to go blah, blah, blah. And we jump in his car. We give him whatever. I don't know what it cost back then. I have no idea. Probably a couple bucks. It's 70s, probably a couple bucks. And you go there and you get taken where you got to go. And I think that we do have a history of it actually working. But what we had a history of is no government control. I feel this is a control issue more than anything else.
Yeah, and there's kind of been like 2.0 versions of this. Well, Uber in a sense is a 2.0 version of this.
Yeah.
But even the whole microbus version, like there's been little companies, startups in Silicon Valley that try to do kind of the tech infused version of this, and municipal governments have squashed them.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of sad because yeah, like you say, it's control. It's wanting to control how people get to move around, which is one of the most innate freedoms. And yet the government wants to control that, and the public transit monopolies.
And doesn't provide the worst part is it doesn't even provide better service, right? While I would disagree, I could still understand why somebody would say, you know what, take my freedom, I have better service, right? Again, I would disagree with it, but I can understand it, right? You just want better service, fine, take some of my freedom. I would understand that logic, I do. But again, disagree with it. But we don't even get better service. So we get worse service,
it's worse.
Less choice,
it's worse.
And less freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, I think New York City would be an example of if you just let the market rip, you would probably have like a ton of these microbuses going all around. And to your point, it would be better. It would be better service. Just in the way that Uber is often better service than cabs. This would be better service than the New York City buses because they'd be ubiquitous. Like they'd have faster delivery times and faster pickups and headweights and things like that. Whereas my most recent experience in New York was like, you know, you're waiting 10 to 15 minutes for a bus in the middle of New York City.
Yes.
Like that shouldn't be a reality.
100%. Absolutely. So guys, if you like this show and you think it's doing if it's good and it's valuable to you, click that like button. It really does matter. If you happen to be on Twitter, please retweet it. It does matter if you can. Every bit we can get around the algorithms is going to help us tremendously. So please do that if you can. I want to say thank you so much for coming on, Scott. I appreciate it. And for those of you who want to follow Scott, don't forget marketurbanismreport.com, or follow him on Twitter at the Market Urbanist. I know you got a hard stop. I'm going to let you run. Thank you so much for coming on, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry.
Have a good one. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that show. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was fun. He gave me some different ideas. I know I've been talking a little bit here or there. You know the show. I've been talking in the past often to people who are more left-leaning, talking about, UBI the other day, those types of things. But I also talk about people who are thinking about how to fix things with market answers also. I think they're all important for us to hear and to go back and forth. And if we're going to start having conversations, change people's minds, we got to hear what all sides are thinking so we can have those conversations. I hope you are finding this valuable, right, to the best of my ability to give you interesting conversations with interesting people talking about things that matter with experts, guys like Scott. So Scott says, we did enjoy the show. I joined late, So watch the entire show after it's finished. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate that. And if you do, please, I hope you've already clicked that like button, and I hope you will share. Guys, I'm going to be off for a couple days this weekend. I'm going to be off, but I'll be having some other things pop up along the shows on my YouTube page. You can watch those. I'll be back here Monday night live yet again. I will see you all very soon.